All right, we're going to do something different this week. This week, you are stuck with me. It's just me, myself, and I have no guest, and we are here talking about something that happened and exploded all over the internet, and something that I think that a large number of the people who listen to this podcast will be really interested in. So if you haven't seen this already, there was a career guide that was published by Indeed, which is the biggest job site in the world. They have 365 million daily users, 3.5 million different employers actually place jobs on Indeed and hope to source candidates from the platform. So it's a massive site on the internet, right? And so what we're talking about is an entire debacle that unfolded when it was uncovered on the internet very recently. And this career guide had extremely ageist language within it. Like, it's going to blow your mind exactly what they said in there. And so there was a huge uproar from people all over the world. So I'm going to walk you through what that was and why it matters and what the outcomes will be. I want to point out that I did invite Indeed to come on the show, and unfortunately they declined to show up. So for better or worse, you're just sitting here with me. So we're going to go through it. We're going to talk about why. Actually, curiously, I'm actually a little bit, I guess, pleased that Indeed actually published this insane thing because, well, I'll tell you later. First things first, to give you a heads up, Indeed is a massive organization. They are held by a publicly traded Japanese company called Recruit Holdings, and they have 11,500 employees worldwide. So they operate in 60 different countries. They have headquarters in Austin, Texas, and Stamford, Connecticut. So they're a big employer in and of themselves, right? And they also have a ton of jobs online, right? So it's the number one destination for job seekers. So, a really big, important entity in our career landscape as far as it goes hiring for jobs, right? One of the values that they put on their website front and center is that they want to remove bias and barriers to employment, which is very interesting in light of what all happened here. I also want to read this statement that's on their website that says, as a mission-driven company, Indeed created our ESG commitments to go hand in hand with what we do best. We help all people get jobs. How we do that matters. By reducing our environmental footprint, making job search faster and simpler, removing bias and barriers to employment, and building sustainable equity for our people, we get closer to achieving our mission. The work is continuous and our learnings are constantly growing. We are tackling systemic, deeply rooted issues. As we work to make our ESG commitments a reality, we strive to be transparent about our progress and accountable to job seekers, employers, and our communities. So throughout the course of this episode, I want this statement to be top of mind for you. This is what they say on their website as what they hold dear as a company. All right, so I want to take you through exactly how this all unfolded for me. It's kind of funny. So I was dealing with insomnia, something that happens for me on occasion, and I woke up around 3 in the morning Pacific time, and for some reason, this is showing you exactly how cool I am, I went onto LinkedIn. I don't know, I grabbed my supercomputer and decided I would just go on to social media because of course that's going to help me get back to sleep, right? So I go on at about 3 a.m. and I see a flurry of posts, and they're all about this Indeed career guide. I'm like, what is this? What's everyone talking about? People are really up in arms about it. So at this point in the morning, my time, I'm seeing posts from the UK primarily. I'm seeing people who are anti-ageism advocates and activists over in the UK. I'm seeing people like, Sarah Taylor Phillips. I'm seeing Victoria Tomlinson. I'm seeing Lindsay Simpson. I'm seeing all these people post about this Indeed career guide. And when I see the actual image that they've posted, it blows my mind because it is so incredibly ageist. And so it wakes me all the way up. And I decide I have to actually go read this Indeed career guide myself. Like, it wasn't enough to just merely look at that image, which I'll get into momentarily. So I read the whole guide. I was floored, like gobsmacked, like I could not believe what I was reading. And so I actually put together a post at 3 a.m. my time. And because LinkedIn is such a phenomenal platform, even though I scheduled it to drop at 8 a.m. Pacific, it actually published right away. And so it went out into the ether, and most of my connections and network are not in the UK, not so many hours ahead. But for whatever reason, it just took off. My post took off, as did those of the people that I just mentioned, and many, many more. So there was a total firestorm about this subject on LinkedIn. It was going wild. Okay, so then I finally figured out how to go back to sleep after getting all enraged about this guide and posting the post, and fell back asleep. And when I woke up around 8 something, it was still going. It was going crazy. It was wild. And so by about 9 a.m., I actually received an apology via Indeed, like their social media page. Indeed put and posted an apology in my comment section on the post that I had created about their career guide. And they had also gone and removed the offending post from their website. That post had been up for over a year, and within mere hours of it surfacing on LinkedIn, the company both apologized and pulled the actual offensive guide off the website. So pretty swift action. I have to hand it to them at Indeed, as in stark contrast to other things that have come up, like, for example, LinkedIn's incredibly ageist ad that we had a whole campaign against on LinkedIn. I actually didn't participate in that, but a lot of people who are anti-ageism activists were mentioning that this was so wrong. LinkedIn took 4 months to pull the ad, which was wild. So I think it's important now to focus in on exactly what the content itself was. So we're going to go through exactly what the Indeed career guide said and the various career phases that they laid out for any of their readers. All right, so the guide itself, I want to go over what they said the different career stages were for people in this career guide. So the first was exploration, and that is ages 21 to 25. The next was establishment, 25 to 35 years of age. Mid-career, 35 to 45. All right, okay. Then we get to late career, which they describe as 45 to 55. And then last, but most certainly not least, especially when it comes to the uproar, decline. And decline was from 55 to 65. So as you can imagine, quite a few people were not too pleased with having their years defined for them around career stages, first and foremost, so offensive in and of itself. But then to be told that you are in late career at as early as 45, which for me is in only about 3 years and change, or decline. I mean, decline, the connotations of the word decline, I don't think I have to tell many people, not great, not great. And also just like not at all accurate, right? So we'll get into why all these are problems. But so not only was this graphic just ridiculous, but actually the narrative within the document itself was even more offensive. It was mind-boggling. And I am grateful that I happened to snap a couple screenshots of this particular guide, because had I not done so in my sleep-addled, weird state in the middle of the night, I wouldn't have access to any of this content because they pulled it so quickly. That's how bad this guide was. And so what I want to do is actually want to read you parts of this guide. All right, so buckle up. We are going to go into what they said in the original job guide for late career. That is, for those of you listening at home, a reminder, 45 to 55 years of age. Presuming that you progress through the mid-career stage successfully, and again, I really wish I still had the full guide so I could tell you what they deem to be a successful mid-career, if you will. So presuming that you progress through the mid-career stage successfully, the late career stage can be an opportunity for a less demanding work environment. Rather than learning or obtaining new skills, the late stage employee can teach others and begin identifying and training a successor. Yeah, they wrote that. You may have fewer opportunities for advancement, but you can enjoy tasks like mentoring younger employees. You will likely not have any job changes during this stage, relying on your reputation and good standing as security for your position. You can begin to envision what your life will look like after retirement and may spend less time working and more time doing activities you enjoy outside of work. Yeah, that was actually published on their website. I know. I'm blown away too. We're going to unpack these statements one by one and just kind of go through why it's horrible advice, right? The one thing that really bothers me about this first assertion, that you should be looking for a less demanding workplace in your 40s and 50s, is the concept that if you're below that age, you should just do nothing but work, right? That work should be the central focus of your life and everything else should fall to the wayside until, you reach some specific stage where life outside of work suddenly creates more purpose for you. That's not how this works. And I would argue that a lot of people in the younger generations right now are actively pushing against the narrative that our whole lives should be about work. There's this whole concept of, pushing back against the hustle culture and the concept that we all need to be grinding constantly in order to feel productive and feel good about ourselves. This is something that people don't want to see anymore. People are asking for flexibility in their lives. They're asking for work-life balance. They're asking for workplaces that see them as humans rather than cogs in a wheel. Like, this is very much emblematic of these younger generations. So it's also just like not true in terms of what I have seen and what has been reported on for these people who are coming up the ranks in these organizations. So there's that. It also frustrates me because I think a lot of tech companies proactively target younger people as employees. And I think, being the cynic that I am, that a large part of why they want to do that, it's so that they can pay them less, right? Because these people are newer to the workforce. They don't have the experience that would necessarily command higher salaries. But it's also because they don't have boundaries yet. They don't have a sense of what is normal in the workforce. They don't have a concept of what work-life balance or an appropriate, healthy workplace would look like. And I think that a lot of companies are like, oh, sweet, let's seize on these people who don't know any better yet. I also want to point out how ridiculous it is to assert that people in their 40s and 50s might want a less demanding work environment. If you think about it, people in their 40s and 50s are, for example, women who have come back to the workplace after having given birth and having their kids in school, and they suddenly find themselves with more time than they have in many years to go crush their careers. So I don't think people who are doing that, for example, are looking for like a cushy job necessarily. And to the larger point, people are different. People of all one age group are not the same in what they want and they need and what drives them and what they want to have happen in their workplaces. That's just not how it goes. So to suggest that an entire group of people wants a specific thing is just, it's sheer lunacy at this point. Not only that, I would say that the people in their 40s and 50s with whom I have been lucky enough to work in the workplace, and now I guess I'm coming up in ranks, I'm going to be one of them myself very soon in mid 40s and beyond. But I can tell you that some of the best employees I've ever worked alongside were people in their 40s and 50s, and people often who actually had kids who had then gone off to college, who'd flown the coop. So empty nesters, if you will. They have all this renewed dedication to the cause, right? In many cases, they are ready to just go and kill it at work because they don't have the same responsibilities at home that they used to. So I think they're a really overlooked section of the workforce. And so to suggest that people might necessarily want a less demanding environment simply because they're in that age is just completely wrong, right? And in practice, I've seen it to be demonstrably false. And yet again, it goes back to the point that this is just a stereotype, and we should not be making broad brushstrokes claims about groups based on age using stereotypes. So let's move on to this next sentence, which is incredibly problematic. And it is, rather than learning or obtaining new skills, the late stage employee can teach others and begin identifying and training a successor. First of all, the assertion, the underlying implication here is that older people do not learn new skills and that they shouldn't have to. Now, this brings to mind an idiom that drives me nuts, which is, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which is patently false and something that continues to persist in the workplace and in society. And it's incredibly damaging to people who happen to be in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, right? So people do learn new things as they age. I learn new things every single day, and I'm better for it. So yeah, our brain might not have the same processing speed that it did when we were younger. It might not have that same sort of pliability and quickness to just capture new information. But what it does have is a better ability to draw from experience and make better decisions on the whole. This is why having an age-diverse team is so impactful. You have people with differing strengths on it, right? And that includes your brain ability, right? So the knowledge that you gain over time is incredibly beneficial as an employee. So this is just absolutely ridiculous assertion. And it infuriates me as an aspiring older person as well. Like, we are all going to continue to learn, grow, and change. It is not an option to sit back and say, you know what, I want to do things the way that I used to do them in the corporate world. There are new technologies, there are new ways of working, there are new unfolding events on a global scale that happen constantly. There is not an option to opt out of learning. That is not possible. So this is just infuriating to me. I want to touch on the concept of a successor and creating a successor within your organization. So it's something that used to be really part and parcel for the corporate world, for sure. And I mean, there's a whole show called Succession, right? Which is fantastic, by the way. But as people live longer and longer lives and more people either because they want to or need to, are staying in the workforce longer. This sort of a concept is really, it's shifting, and it's outdated at this point. At this point, the average age of retirement, it shifted from 57 back in 1991 to 61 today. And this is actually continuing to shift, right? Retirement age is getting later and later. Like, the Social Security age has already shifted from 65 to 67. If you'll recall, back in France last summer, there were huge protests about taking the retirement age from 62 to 64 in France. So here in America, of course, as we do, we work longer, harder, all that stuff, right? All those stereotypes. But so we've already gone from 65 to 67. Humans are living longer. And people are still not saving enough for retirement. So whether it's people who want to come back to the workplace and give it their all because they want the joy that they can derive from being in the workplace, or they feel they have more that they can do, or perhaps they like the social community aspect of work, whatever it might be, people are staying in the workplace longer, right? It's also worth mentioning that a full 25% of the workforce is going to be over 55 by 2031. I don't know about you, but that seems like a lot of people to me. That's 1 in 4 people who are going to be over 55. So to label them all as, in decline it's simply not true. As we go on in our lives and human longevity and the span increases, we're going to see more and more people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond in the workforce. The next part, you may have fewer opportunities for advancement. I would go ahead and say that's actually probably pretty true. So there is this thing called up or out that we know to be, it's enough of the thing that there's a term for it, right? So in tech organizations, in corporate America, if you haven't reached a certain point in your career, on the career ladder, at a certain point, there is a very legitimate fear that you could be pushed out, right? So up or out, that's a thing. And so there might be fewer opportunities for advancement if you haven't already hit a specific rung of that career ladder as you're in your 40s and 50s. I do believe that to be true. I think it's more, and I don't have particular data to back this assertion up, but I believe it's harder and harder as you get older if you haven't already achieved a certain level to reach the next one, because people look just instinctively, they look to the younger generation, or they look to other people who are rising stars, if you will. They don't necessarily look at, Jane, who's been an individual contributor killing it in her career for the last 15 years, for a sudden promotion up to director or something like that. That just is not something that's very typical in what I have seen. And I will definitely look for more data on that, because I think that would be a really interesting subject in and of itself for an episode. But so I think there are fewer opportunities for people as we age, right? And there's also just the sheer fact that, as you go up the ladder at an organization, there are fewer and fewer positions available. So if you haven't already gotten there, there aren't so many. It's a supply and demand situation, right? So there's that sort of logic behind it too. So I think that's somewhat fair. But to suggest that the tasks that you can really enjoy at this point are simply mentoring, and again, younger employees, that's what they say here, is wild. Because you do have people who are pivoting into different roles and pivoting into new industries. And so, first of all, assigning age to the experience level of employees is kind of a misnomer and a little bit misleading, first and foremost. But also, mentorship in and of itself, that should be bidirectional. That should have no age attached to it. It's about experience, right? And so for them to call out specifically younger employees as the way in which mentorship should work, it's missing a key point. And I think that's why there's, for example, a term called reverse mentorship, which I wish didn't exist. And what that is indicative of, essentially, is that typically we've always thought of mentorship as something that comes down from the older people to the younger people. And that's simply not true. I actually work with younger people who help me with social media and podcast production, and I learn from them literally every day. They are incredible, and they learn from me too. And we teach one another different things. And I don't want to call that reverse mentorship, because it should just be mentorship. It's about experience and subject matter expert. I'll get off my soapbox on that. It says here, you likely won't have any job changes during this stage. And I want to call out how wrong that is. This is the age in the 50s and above where most likely, if you lose your job, it probably wasn't your choice. And when you lose it, it's going to take you up to twice as long to find a replacement job. And then when you find a job eventually, it's likely not going to pay you as much as the job that you lost. So job changes abound in people's 40s, 50s. Also, suggesting that relying on your reputation and your good standing is going to be security, Also not true. People who have been laid off after 20 odd years at various organizations have been reaching out to me, who've been in good standing, who've gotten great feedback, who've gotten great promotions, etc. They're still losing their jobs too. There is no loyalty in corporate. And so to assert that in this guide is I mean, we all know better now, right? We know that that doesn't exist. This is the time when people are more likely to actually find themselves in a layoff, whether that's by, nefarious ageist reasons or reasons of cost cutting. If people have risen through the ranks and suddenly find themselves as one of the, high performers. I mean, how ironic is that? You're a high performer, you get paid well, and you get penalized for that. So you get on the layoff list. So this is actually the time of life when people often find themselves out of work. So loyalty does not exist. Your great reputation, your performance does not secure your position whatsoever. Then this next one, you can begin to envision your life in retirement, what your life is going to look like. I don't know about you. I can tell you, I can count maybe on one hand, possibly like one finger, how many people I've spoken with of late who are actively envisioning their retirement in their 40s and think that it's plausible for them to do so anytime soon. This is not something that people really do on average. Yeah, sure, you might find some people who just hit it big and got into a unicorn, like an actual unicorn startup, and their options were worth something, and they might have that opportunity. But for the average bear, this is not something that's very plausible. So 40s and 50s is not when you start like daydreaming about retirement. It's when you kick your retirement savings up into high gear at the point at which your employment might be a little bit more precarious, right? And not guaranteed. So this is not something that is happening. It also says that we should spend time working, spend less time working and more time doing activities we enjoy out of work. Well, I can tell you that quite so many people that I've spoken with in the tech industry are instead doing the literal opposite right now, where they're working their tails off, trying to preserve their job, trying to keep their seat at the table, trying to keep food on the table. And so I don't think it's necessarily something that people are focused on. I think there is also simultaneously an understanding from more and more people that corporate employment is not the safety net that we thought it was. And so maybe if they are doing more work, it might be for their backup plan B, right? It might be their, I hate this term so much, side hustle. It might be their backup plan. It might be a consulting business they're starting on the side. It might be some sort of other, short type of employment, gig type of employment. So again, I mean, this is just outdated and incorrect advice. All right, so I want to cover what they say about the decline era. So this, if you're in your decline era, this is what the guide said. So after finishing a solid career and several decades in the workforce, many people are ready to retire. After retirement, you may choose to enjoy the break from working by spending more time with family and friends and traveling. You can channel your skills and knowledge into reviving past hobbies, developing new interests, or volunteering. Depending on your financial situation, lifestyle, and energy level, you may also consider finding other ways to make money, such as working part-time, consulting on a freelance basis, finding another full-time job. Tips for success in the decline stage. Stay engaged with activities such as lifelong learning opportunities, painting, and reading. Continue to socialize by meeting with friends and family regularly, and share your knowledge through teaching at a community center or college. So funny. So there are already contradictions in here, right? The last stage of our career, which was late career, they told us that we should just like stop with the whole learning thing, like that we didn't need to do that anymore. In fact, we should be training our successors. We should be ensuring that those people get all the skills. We don't need to change. We don't need to learn. So now they're telling us learning is great and we should get more of it. So very confusing shift there from late stage to decline. By the way, decline sounds rad, and I want to do it now because it's like working part-time, consulting, having more work-life balance, hanging out with your friends and family. Sign me up for decline right now. I'm in. It's just, yeah. Also, all of these are things that people do before age 55 often, and after age 65 as well. Like, people don't just suddenly start enjoying life in their later years. In fact, hopefully that's something that's been part of your life throughout, right? So again, funny. Also, finding another full-time job is damn near laughable because we all know exactly how freaking hard it is to do that in your 50s and 60s. Just ask my audience. They reach out to me constantly about their job searches. I mean, some of the stuff that I hear is downright heartbreaking. And we all know how tough it is. It's not to say that you can't do it. I have success stories as well. My past guest, John Parisi, he was lamenting the fact that interviewing as a person in your 60s in the tech industry is just horrible. And we had a whole episode about it. But he had the right mentality and he went forward in the right way. And he used his age as an advantage. He used his connections and his network that he'd built over the course of decades and all of the good reputation he'd built by doing good work to land him his next position. So you can absolutely get a job in your 50s, 60s, beyond. It's just really hard, right? And it doesn't happen overnight, and it might not pay you as much as the one you left, right? There's a reason that they're suggesting you find part-time work and consulting. And that is solely because, or I should say specifically because, it is so hard to find full-time work into those years, right? So it's just kind of all over the map. It's like, this is just kind of strange advice. So again, if you want to learn how to paint and read, I'm going to tell you right now, you do not have to wait until you're 55. You can do that now. So go ahead. Yeah. And again, friends, family, something that I hope that you have also been doing, hanging out with, being a part of things throughout your entire career. And not something that you just like hold out and wait for until your 50s or 60s. Again, that's that whole like toxic hustle culture, productivity thing that a lot of our capitalistic society promotes. And I'm just like, no, young people and people of all ages like doing things outside of work, and work is not the only thing that matters. So again, this guide is kind of suggesting like, oh no, let's wait until we get into our 50s and 60s to enjoy like the finer things in life, like the simple, lovely things in life. No, we're not going to do that. So very interesting. But again, like want to drill down on this. It's very insightful to me. And this is in a way, like I actually understand why this was printed, because it is reflective of exactly how the world is, right? Like it's not the way it should be, but it is kind of the way it is, right? Because it is hard to find a job in your 50s and 60s. Companies don't often like hiring them, which is such a missed opportunity, and we need to change it. I would really not like, I really don't understand how I'm reading this on a job site. Like that is terrible. But they are also, I understand how this was created, because this is how a lot of companies think. It's wrong, but it's how a lot of companies think. And they are talking about a phenomenon that is super real, which is that as you get older, you're more likely to find a role as an advisor or a consultant or doing something part-time, project-based work, right? Like people are more likely to hire you in those roles. You can leave tech and go into a consulting firm, for example. That's something that happens all the time. You can create your own consultancy. And it's funny because your experience and your knowledge and your know-how and your value as a full-time employee seems to just like evaporate at a certain point, like in your 40s, in your 50s. And yet your business know-how and understanding is something that's so sought after that you would be brought in as like a pinch hitter. So very interesting that that's the case. Again, financial situations are all very different, right? People have different lifestyles, people have different needs, different scenarios. And I would probably argue that the majority of people out there have not saved enough for retirement. And that's something that people are going to need to contend with. They're either going to need to come into their Social Security. I hope we have Social Security by the time I need it, right? Like it's not a foregone conclusion at this point in American society that all of us who are coming up will actually be able to draw from Social Security. It's a terrifying thought, but it might not happen. So there's a lot, and this is not a financial podcast. You cannot get financial advice from me. Trust me, you don't want it. Math is not my strong suit, but we will bring an expert on that though. That's been on my list for a long time. But, there's just a huge difference in terms of people's needs in retirement and how much they've saved throughout the course of their lives, their earning potential, there's just so much complexity to this. You can't broad brush stroke at it. But again, this section, yeah, the first section bothered me so much because it was full of just like outrageous stereotypes. And this one, it's not great, but it's a little bit more reflective of the way I think of the past, right? Again, people aren't retiring anymore at this stage or age. It's something that's getting pushed out. So again, this is outdated advice, but I can kind of understand how it happened, if that makes sense. So just kind of trying to be fair here. Yeah, it's really interesting. The shift in tone from like go get 'em, hard charging, all the way to late stage of your career, late career to decline. It's fascinating to me. Just the drop off in this guide is just like, phone it in. You're done. It's cool. Maybe get a part-time job. So yeah, that's the late career and decline as described in the guide before it was pulled. Some people were laughing about it. They're like, dude, Indeed just like accidentally published their internal hiring practices in the form of this guide. And so it does leave me a little bit concerned about the sorts of practices that they have internally at Indeed and whether or not they do have an age diverse and age friendly environment for people of all ages to work there. This is a huge company, right, with a lot of power. So it's concerning to consider that perhaps they might not have the right practices internally either. Certainly like other places in Silicon Valley, I'm thinking of Facebook and other sorts of social media companies, there's a question as to whether they have responsibility at Indeed for the types of ads that are placed on their platform. For example, Facebook would say that's not up to us to police essentially what's going to be in there content wise and whether it's biased or promotes, harmful stereotypes or what have you. But especially when it comes to a job site, I think, you could argue that that's a really important piece. I was, as I said, unable to get someone from Indeed to come on the show. I would have loved to have asked them their policy on, what about the job placement ads that are on their site? Do they have oversight over them and what in terms of the kinds of language that they use to recruit people on their platform? My gut tells me they probably don't take responsibility for that. I question whether that's the right approach. It seems, especially in the age of AI, there should be mechanisms by which they can filter out harmful narratives and harmful job descriptions and things that might perpetuate stereotypes. And given the fact this is something they allegedly really care about as a core tenet of their company, I would think that would be something they could do, especially since there's also, a lot of different organizations out there that provide software that help people remove bias, like Textio, for example. We've had a past guest from Textio on our show. But yeah, it's just, this is the sort of thing that concerns me because it's out there. And, it's funny because I also want to say, and I led with this, right, in the opening, I said, there's a reason why I'm actually a little bit grateful to Indeed for having put this out there. And the reason is that often these sorts of notions and these ageist stereotypes and all these things that happen societally, they kind of operate under the surface, right? It's sort of a taboo topic, but it's also just kind of the last socially acceptable form of discrimination out there. Like people say ageist things all the time. They're tropes all over media. You see it in situational comedies on TV. You see them in movies, all these ageist things. So it's like accepted, right? And so I'm almost grateful that this got published because it gave us a chance to have this conversation. So in a weird, twisted way, I want to say thank you to Indeed for putting this absolute drivel up on their website, for which they did apologize. And I do want to call that out. I think that plenty of corporate entities out there really should apologize deeply for the harm that they do. I do think that Indeed made they took ownership, right? And even the chief marketing officer, Jessica Jensen, on LinkedIn publicly commented, I wrote this particular apology. It was me. And we mean it. We stand by it. We pulled it and we are sorry. And it was very direct. So I appreciate that. And I will say that I do believe that there are other things that need to happen on the back end of something like this to really indicate systemic change and try to make up for any sort of harm that could have been caused by people reading this nonsense. But I do want to call out, like, she owned it. And a lot of corporate entities, a lot of corporations would just like slough it off. They'd ignore it. They'd let it all die down, or they'd give some half apology. And Indeed didn't do that. They acted quickly and they did take ownership. So I have to give them credit for that. I really wish that they were here on the show to actually give their side of the story, to talk about some of the other resources that they have for older workers, and to talk about any sort of internal policy change that might come as a result of this, perhaps any sort of training that they might embark on to help them ensure that they don't have this kind of bias seeping into their internal politics at the company, and to ensure that this kind of content never makes it to the site ever again. I mean, all through reading this career guide and taking in the graphic and everything, I couldn't help but wonder how the hell did this actually come from a concept that someone had to actually being published and kept on the site for over a year. That's mind-boggling to me. a lot of these things, they go through multiple layers of approval processes. It's not just like you upload it to the site and it's ready to rock. So it was something that I kept on thinking through. I was like, how did someone think about this, take it to, one of their managers, sit down in a conference room, go through this, and how did someone like greenlight this? Like, there were multiple people involved. How did no one stop this? Which, of course, made me think, gosh, do they have no one who works there who's over 40? Like, do they have no one who could possibly envision how offensive this could be in the future? Does no one talk? And then other people were like, hey, it was probably some artificial intelligence generated article. There are all these content mills out there that just churn out this nonsense. And that's also possible. But then the question remains, well, don't companies have a responsibility to look at the type of content that they're posting before they post it to ensure that it doesn't include this kind of harmful narrative? I would argue yes. And it's also another point for like human oversight. It's a cool thing, right? We should do it. And again, if you have a multi-generational team, I have a hard time envisioning how this ever gets to print, because the backlash was uniformly just like terrible response. Like, no one was like, this is a great guide. Again, I do think that some of what was written in the guide is a reflection really of what used to be sort of more of the norm in corporate. And so I think that that's probably the genesis of why this guide exists and how it actually came to print. So like I said, despite the fact that I was actively trying to arrange a specific individual to get on my show to schedule it, Indeed ultimately came back and the PR agency that they work with said, hey, we're not going to have a spokesperson available for your interview. So he did provide me with this statement. So I'm going to read it to you now. People of all ages and generations are critical to bringing a broad range of skills, experiences, and ideas to the workforce. Older workers in particular are vital and highly valued leaders, mentors, and contributors to the workplace. We deeply apologize for content that wrongly negated the important role workers play at every stage of their career. Such content does not reflect our values of inclusivity, our hiring practices, or the way we operate. We remain committed to our mission to help all people of all ages get jobs. So that is their official statement from Indeed that's beyond the public apology issued on LinkedIn, on my post and others. They also asked me to tell you that they have events and resources for older workers. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. So on November 7th at 12 p.m. Central Time, Indeed experts will host a webinar titled Success and Satisfaction in the Later Stages of Your Career. So I will link that in the show notes. They've also done webinars in the past, some of which include age discrimination and hiring, job tips for mature workers, and applying to jobs as an older worker, resume and interview tips to avoid age bias. They've also published articles such as Ageism in the Workplace, its impact and how to prevent it, and the ADEA, an employer's guide to the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. So they have proactively put out content on this subject in the past, and they will do so in the future. So that's what they wanted me to share with you, my audience, about how they are moving forward from this experience and their thoughts on what actually happened. So wanted to make sure to give you all that. Now, again, I still wish that they had made someone available to be on the show. I would have loved to have gone much more in depth because, as everybody knows, it's hard to ascertain exactly how much this apology holds weight without seeing exactly what they're doing internally as an organization, or talking through, how do you look at job ads on your site? Do you have some sort of filter that helps remove bias? Do you work with any sort of software company that actively does that? It's hard to really glean exactly how seriously they're taking this. That's just being really totally frank with you here. I hope they are. But again, I think when it comes down to it, a lot of this is systemic in nature. And so these sorts of stereotypes and biases, they are embedded within not only our own psyches, but also organizations. And so what I would have loved to have heard more from them is on how they are going to address this internally at their organization and how they're going to potentially advise other companies that are on their platform to remove bias about age in their job postings and in their employment practices internally. So, that's where I'd like to see the change. I'd also like to see a commitment to talking more about a multi-generational workforce, because I think that's a very critical critical component to this. Like putting people in these different silos and saying that this group is one way versus another is a really intensely problematic thing. And that was very much the case with our career guide. And so talking through, how can we encourage and foster intergenerational communication and collaboration for enhanced innovation and better outcomes at the workplace, that would be a really great thing to see them publicly commit to. And so, yeah, I wish we'd had the chance to get together. I think the absence of that opportunity means that, people can kind of draw their own conclusions and make inferences based on what they ultimately did, which was not show up. But yeah, those are my thoughts on, what is left kind of unchecked here. Again, just I would like to know that they're doing more than this, because I think the fact that they had done other sort of content on age in the past, and yet they still had this career guide that was published that was so ageist, it indicates to me that maybe not everybody at their organization is very aware of exactly how to operate in this realm, and they might need a little bit more, frankly, training. So, yeah, but again, at the end of the day, I'm ultimately oddly grateful, perversely grateful that this saw the light of day for over a year and that someone actually found it and surfaced it on LinkedIn and spread the word, because here we are having this conversation. And these sorts of conversations are what's going to lead to lasting change. So let's go do it. And again, thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you for being here. Please share the show with people who who are grappling with getting older in the workplace or dealing with ageism in society even. This is a topic that needs to have a lot more airtime, and it's growing. And I'm super heartened by things like the uproar against this career guide, right? Like people were ticked off. People won't stand for it anymore. And so the casual ageism that continues to run unchecked in our society, I think that's going to be a thing of the past, and probably sooner rather than later. And yeah, reach out if your organization is interested in sparking a conversation about this, because I am going to corporations and having lunch and learns and giving workshops on the subject of age diversity and the importance of having a multi-generational team. And I try to keep it light and fun, but also give you some real stats and stuff that you can sink your teeth into. So please spread the word. I'm available, and I'm excited to start doing more of that work. And so I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. As I have joked to many people, it's been kind of rough, marketing a podcast about getting older, because, a lot of people want to pretend it's not happening. And it's not something that traditionally people have really worn with pride. And I do think that is changing. And so I just want to leave you guys all with this message of hope and excitement. Things are going to change. Employers are going to wake up. People are going to recognize the immense value that older workers and people of all ages bring to the workplace. And we're going to build a future where the number of candles on our birthday cake has absolutely nothing to do with our perceived value in society or the workplace. So cheers to that future. It's coming.